Say no. All right, cool. Oh my God. We're here with Alec Shea,
Hello.
who I met yesterday here at GDC. I overheard him speaking Japanese to someone, and the rest is history.
Yeah. So I was there with two friends, a guy from Hong Kong who lives in Japan and a guy from Japan who lives in Japan. And the three of us are composers and, kind of here connecting with people. Till recently I was based in Japan. I lived there for nearly 5 years. But the end part of it, I was sort of back and forth between Japan and Germany until I finally decided to relocate to Germany, where my partner works. I started fairly young with music, probably around 8, learning classical piano. Was a hardcore classical nerd. Spent a lot of time practicing, but would never spend that much time practicing the same piece. So I would get pretty good at lots of different pieces, but never really, really good at some pieces. When I enter competitions, I kind of, one of the main pieces of feedback was like, you kind of needed to just practice it more. Your technique is good, but your fingers just don't have the perfect muscle memory for the piece. And you can never get into that really meticulous practicing of just like, these 3 notes, it's like a fast passage, so you just got to do it like 100 times until you can get it or whatever. Yeah, fast forward to high school, I changed schools and went to a school with like a really good music program that let you sort of specialize in a particular part of music for your last 2 years. And the first year I did performance and didn't get a very good mark. So the last year of school I decided to do composition, and it went a lot better. Nice. And I also really liked because doing composition, you didn't have to take an exam. You just had to submit a portfolio. I'm not a big exam fan. I don't like you've got this long to answer this many questions. It's like, the portfolio thing was like, you need to write this much music, you've got 3 months.
Sure.
And I loved it. And so one of the pieces that I wrote for that portfolio won like a little local competition. Cool. And got performed by a local orchestra at a concert.
Amazing.
Which was really, really awesome.
Yeah.
And from then I was sort of like, okay, I could get more into this.
Yeah.
But I'd also just started to explore the audio side of things. Believe it or not, my high school also actually had a subject you could take specifically in audio design.
Wow.
And
Nice high school.
yeah, it's kind of weird. Like, all of Tasmania actually has that as a core subject you can take that goes towards like your university grade, which is weird because, like, as far as I know, the rest of Australia doesn't. And Tasmania's like not a big fancy place.
Okay, yeah.
It's kind of funny.
Interesting.
But so I started exploring like the mixing and the synth design and all that side of things. And
Sure.
ended up going into audio engineering at university, sort of with the intention of maybe becoming a music producer, but eventually throughout the course realizing that I didn't really want to produce other people's music. And that's when I finally circled around into like game music. That could be a thing.
Nice.
And so basically, as soon as university finished, I went straight into trying to make a freelance career as a game composer. I definitely did not take the most efficient approach.
Okay.
I took the brute force approach. I was scouring the internet, every single place I could find for the smallest project. Worked on a bunch of like really random Newgrounds things, and just any person I could find that was making some kind of game that wanted music, I would jump on it.
Wow.
And so it, I guess, kind of worked in the end, but I don't know if I would recommend other people take that approach.
Sure. You got what you wanted, but
there's potentially more efficient things I could have done if I was in the know. And my piece of advice is, if you want to do that kind of thing, attend game jams, whether they're in person or online. I think that's a much more condensed, efficient way of doing what I did. With much less effort,
right.
I guess.
Sure.
Right. Yeah, so I kind of
like it condenses the random internet stuff into
exactly
a weekend or two.
You've got a bunch of people who are there committed to making a project, the scope is generally reasonable because it's like you've got this long to make a game.
Right.
So they're like, like the global game jams, the biggest ones, like 48 hours.
Right.
You can't do much in 48 hours.
Right.
So people know that and they go, all right, we're going to make something really simple and just explore an idea. And if you get on that team, then, you can show those people in 48 hours what you can do.
Right.
Not to mention, in my experience, audio and music people don't seem to attend game jams. The last game jam I went to was like last month in Munich. There was one other audio person there, and they didn't even do music, just sound design, and I was the only composer. I ended up working on 3 different projects.
Wow.
So, literally within 48 hours, I knew half of the Munich game developer community.
Sure.
So, yeah, that's a really good way to get started, I think. But yeah, anyway, so jumped straight into the freelancing thing, and was kind of working a part-time job and trying to build up the business, and eventually took the plunge and went full-time. I also had the luxury of not just doing music, but also doing sound design, voice acting, and occasionally other little bits of music-related work that would come up. So, gave me a lot more options and a lot more things that I could find that could bring in a few dollars on the side to make that full-time thing viable early on.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And when did the Japan aspect start factoring into things? And
so basically about a year after I went full-time, my partner at the time and I broke up, and I'd always been interested in Japan, or for a while I'd been interested in Japan through anime and Japanese games.
Right.
And I mean, the first game I ever played was Pokemon Blue when I was 5 years old.
Nice.
Played the hell out of it. So, yeah, particularly at that time, I was really, really loving all the Japanese stuff. Being a hardcore weeb, a hardcore otaku, as they say. And I'd been twice on holiday, and kind of just figured now's the time. Let's just find a way to get to Japan and explore that, I guess.
Amazing.
I only planned to go for 6 months, really, originally, and that turned into nearly 5 years.
Wow.
And luckily Australia has a working holiday program with Japan, which means that I could basically go for 18 months without really any requirement other than proving that I had sort of enough money to survive.
Sure.
Which also meant that I could keep freelancing while I was there because it's not a tourist visa, so I can work.
Oh wow.
Yeah, so it's
the working holiday part.
Exactly. Yeah, it's very, very lucky.
Wow.
Then while I was there, I lived in this big share house and met lots of people and sort of was still, doing my freelancing work, but wasn't really, I guess, driving my career forward so much at the time. And was putting a lot of time into learning Japanese. Even ended up doing some freelance translation stuff for a while, which is actually how I got the visa after the working holiday visa.
Okay.
Because getting a visa as a composer is not easy.
Yeah, I was gonna say, right.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah,
the artist visa or whatever.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The few conversations I had with people about that visa was the general consensus was just don't even try unless you're a really famous touring band, or you're an artist who's had their work shown at a bunch of different art galleries around the world, that kind of thing.
Sure.
So the translation visa worked out quite well in that sense. Yeah.
But it seems like that was kind of, you made this leap just for a change that might have, like you said, just you only intended to be there for 6 months, but it turned into something a lot more.
Exactly. Yeah.
Interesting.
No, it was an awesome experience, and I definitely would not speak anywhere near as good Japanese if I hadn't, spent that time there practicing and learning and meeting lots of cool people.
For sure.
Yeah, and it's also where I met my current partner, who I now live in Germany with.
Right.
Also not something I had all expected to happen in Japan.
Yeah. It's often the case that the way that our life actually goes is more interesting than we could ever imagine.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. You know, when I moved to Japan, I did not expect to be there even close to as long as I was, let alone have it lead to me moving to Europe. Like.
Yeah. Wasn't necessarily on your map.
No, not at all. Not at all.
And musically, like, you know, you mentioned that like you had that interest in Japanese culture earlier on.
Yeah.
Were you interested in the style? Did you like transcribe stuff from games you liked, or was that ever kind of
sort of? I mean, yeah, I've never really had the best ear for transcribing, so I don't really do a lot of my own transcribing unless it's sort of, you know, kind of necessary or it's something I really want to work out.
Sure.
But I would look up a lot of, you know, like the game MIDI rips that they turn into sheet music or, you know, stuff like that, and
sure.
Get
Study
a feel for, like, you know, what makes the Japanese music sound like Japanese music, you know.
Sure.
Like, obviously the first place you start is like that, what is it, the
Royal
4536.
Yeah.
Yep. But, you know, when I first started experimenting with that, it still didn't really sound that Japanese. You know, like I didn't really feel like what I wanted it to feel like. And then you start exploring like I was starting the melody on the 9 or on the 7 and that kind of thing, and you kind of build from there.
Right.
It's kind of weird because I guess as a theory nerd, I study all of the theory, but then once I've kind of got it in my head, I stop thinking about it.
Right.
And then when I actually write, I'm not thinking like, oh, I should use like a Neapolitan second here or something. It's like,
right.
I'm just writing and like kind of making it up.
Right.
And then if I'm curious about something that I did that I'm like, that was kind of cool, I'll go back and like analyze it and be like, what did I actually do in like a theory sense here?
Yeah.
But I think having that understanding of like, you know, having the theory understanding kind of then drives the subconscious thing of like, what could I try here that could be cool without really thinking about it, right?
Totally. Yeah.
And so like a lot of my composition starts as improvisation, really. Just messing around on the keyboard, finding that sound that fits the vibe that I'm looking for, or, you know, scrolling through presets to kind of get the right tone, and then working out, you know, what kind of harmonies I could build with this particular synth sound or something like that.
Gotcha. Yeah, makes sense. And then maybe for people who don't know your work, like maybe you could walk us through, you know, projects you've ended up working on since then.
So the first kind of big project that I worked on was a game called Learn Japanese to Survive.
Whoa. Okay. Cool.
A Japanese learning RPG.
Amazing.
The first one was called Hiragana Battle. It was a very small project.
Okay. Not a Newgrounds game?
No.
Okay.
It was an RPG Maker game, actually.
Oh, okay, cool. Nice.
But
close.
Yeah. But funnily enough, you know, the developer, he ran a Kickstarter for it, and, you know, I think he just quit his job, and he was like, you know, really just wanting to do game dev full time, and he put this Kickstarter up, and it hit the goal. It got a little bit over, and he's like, you know, I've got basically like 4 or 5 months worth of income now. I've got to finish this game and release it and hope it does well.
Yep.
And it kind of exploded, like not like crazy, but I think it was also kind of long enough ago that it was in that golden era of Steam where indie games just did really, really well because the Steam marketplace wasn't just flooded with crap like every day, right?
Right.
So yeah, the game did really, really well. And then for the second one, you know, which was Katakana War, he upped the budget a little bit. He was still sort of, you know, mainly just using the money to live, but he hired some voice actors, and I actually voiced one of the characters in that one.
Oh, fun.
Yeah. And then finally for the third one, he's like, all right, I'm going all out, you know, full original soundtrack, full, you know, kind of strong anime voice acting cast. So, you know, we had like Xanthi Quinn, who voiced the last character you unlock in Persona 5.
Okay.
Yeah, so like pretty big anime voice actors and stuff like that.
Wow, that's awesome.
And yeah, and I got to write heaps of music for it across like a big range of genres. He was like, you know, just do whatever you want, really.
Go nuts.
So I wrote some metal battle tracks, I wrote some orchestral battle tracks, and
Cool.
Did a whole bunch of different things. And looking back at it now, it's like I think a lot of the tracks that I wrote for it still hold up quite well as compositions. My mixing back then definitely needed some work.
It wasn't what it is now.
Yeah. The mixing and the mastering, there's some balance issues there. But the other kind of somewhat big issue I think it had was, I guess I wasn't as good at sort of capturing a sonic identity in a game, right? Like I just wrote a bunch of cool tracks, but I didn't really think like what is the sound of this game? How do these tracks actually connect to the different characters? And how does the soundtrack feel cohesive as its own work?
Okay.
Right?
So there weren't like motif references.
There was certain motifs that sort of came back in certain areas, but it was, I guess, a little bit more arbitrary than I would have done if I were to do it now.
Sure.
I would have tried to put a bit more, thought behind where that motif comes back and why it comes back, and just the general sound. Like even if it's not a motif, like this style of music should be associated with like this area or this character, and make sure that even if it's two very different genres, that the way that it's mixed and the way the music's kind of written, it still feels like the same soundtrack.
Sure.
So yeah, that's I guess something I started to work on a little bit.
So those games were kind of your first larger project.
Exactly. Yeah.
Amazing.
And so at least the next bigger project that comes to mind, I did a few like little things here and there. I worked on a few tracks for Yandere Simulator, actually.
Okay, nice.
A lot of the meme music, actually. So
okay.
if you play that game and you do like the, I think there's like a Star Wars outfit you can get, and you can use a lightsaber and cut people up, and it like plays essentially sort of my reimagining of Duel of the Fates and a few things like that.
Fun.
And yeah, there was a few other small projects, I think. Can't think of them off the top of my head. But the next bigger one was that developer's next project, which was a visual novel called How to Date a Magical Girl, which was heavily inspired by Doki Doki Literature Club.
Gotcha. Okay.
And that one, I felt like I started to actually get a better understanding of how a soundtrack should be one whole thing. It had like a lot of, I guess the part that wasn't Doki Doki was a bit Madoka Magica.
Okay.
So I used a lot of acoustic guitar, a lot of glockenspiel, some orchestral stuff and some synth stuff, but I still feel like now when I go back and listen to it, like, each track sounds like a How to Date a Magical Girl track, right?
Cool. There's more of that cohesion that you don't think you had on your first project.
Yes, and I also honed in, I think, a bit more on like the specific, more Japanese sounding, like melodic and harmonic choices.
Amazing.
And kept that kind of consistent throughout the soundtrack as well. And then, by then I was sort of, had a couple soundtracks released, starting to feel a little bit more like a game composer.
Right.
And started sort of doing a bit more reaching out and trying to connect with more developers. And
once you got those under your belt.
Yeah, exactly.
Makes sense.
And yeah, I think it's probably around then that I came to GDC in 2019. That was kind of my first big game conference, and I met a bunch of very cool people who gave me a lot of really good advice. So yeah, shout out to Mason Lieberman, James Landino, and Fabian Malabello. Fabian in particular, I ended up later having sort of a consultation mentor session with him, basically asking like, how can I go bigger than kind of these still fairly small indie projects. And yeah, he sort of gave me really good insight about how I could improve my mixing and improve the soundtrack cohesion and all that kind of thing. But the best thing that he helped me out with was how to write better cold emails. because we composers have a very bad reputation for sending cold emails.
Right.
And sending really bad cold emails, just messaging people if they want a composer without doing anything else.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I sort of, got
That.
that information and learned okay, I should actually look up the company a bit before I go sending them an email and make sure I
Sure.
Know more than just one single image about their project. What's the game's world like? What's the gameplay like?
Sure.
If I were to write music for it, what would I be thinking about? And then, started sending out a few cold emails with that information. And another big thing that I think was important was hand-picking specific samples from my portfolio to send to say, these are the tracks that I've written for other projects that I think are in the same wheelhouse as your project.
Rather than here's my website.
Exactly.
Sure.
And leaving them to find the samples that are relevant.
Sure. That makes sense.
And after that, I think I landed 3 projects within the next month.
Amazing.
Yeah, made a big difference very quickly.
Wow.
And yeah, the first one was another visual novel game from a developer, I think based in Canada, who was basically making kind of a Zero Escape style
Okay.
visual novel with some escape room kind of elements.
Okay.
And the first one that they were working on, it sounded like basically their composer had kind of bailed last minute and they kind of just needed a few tracks to finish it off, and so I wrote those. But then, we started up a good relationship and I worked on their second one, and now their third game I think releases later this year. And each one's sort of just gotten bigger and better, and the art style's gotten better, and
Right. Everyone improves together.
exactly, you can't expect to, I mean, that said, I know people who have, but you can't expect to start at God of War level kind of thing.
Sure.
Some people luck into those opportunities, but
Right.
it's not how you should expect to get into composing for games, I think.
Just apply to work on God of War.
Yeah.
Get the gig.
Well, yeah, actually, though, yeah, that said, a particular example comes to mind. I know someone who was, funnily enough, living in Japan, and towards the end of their time there, they were like, oh, I'm going to send out some applications, and they sent one to Studio Monaco.
Okay.
Monaco? The one that Keiichi Okabe runs, the
Okay.
composer for Nier Automata. And he emailed back saying, we want to meet you. And they met,
Oh my
and
gosh.
now he works there. So
Oh my gosh.
yeah.
So
I
it
mean,
does happen.
I know he had a portfolio that he sent in, and I don't know how good it was, because
Right.
I only know the music that he's written now since joining that studio, and it's fantastic.
Wow.
So maybe he just had a standout, incredible portfolio.
Sure.
So yeah, it can happen, but I wouldn't rely on it, and I would also say if you're going that route, you have to be really, really, really good.
Sure.
A couple years later, finally, the developer for How to Date a Magical Girl has got his new project ready,
Yeah.
Corpse Factory, which is kind of my current claim to fame. And yeah, as the projects grew and were successful, he was more and more willing to go bigger and bigger on each one. And so yeah, he went pretty much all out on this one, hired an absolutely incredible artist from Japan to do all of the art.
Wow.
She'd worked on Sega concept art and stuff like that,
Wow.
really high level art. Of course, brought me on for the music, and then basically said, I want you to be in charge of the voice casting and the voice directing as well.
Wow.
Who should we get? And I'd gotten a feel for the voice acting industry by then as well, and kind of knew what the standard non-union rates are. And if you can afford those rates, and they're not that expensive, it's generally $250 an hour per session hour, with a 2-hour minimum. Which, I mean, sounds like a lot if you're just paying
Right.
out of pocket indie dev kind of thing, but
But if you have a budget, it's reasonable.
yeah, very much so. And so I basically just went and contacted all of the anime voice actors who I think are awesome and would be a perfect fit for each of the characters.
Amazing.
And every single one of them, almost every single one of them got back to me. Only one didn't respond.
Okay.
And then one other said that they would love to do it, but they're just too busy on other projects. And we wanted her for the lead role.
Okay.
And so that's like 8,000 lines. Like she just,
Right.
didn't have the time at the time.
Sure.
But luckily I had a good backup in mind who,
Ended up taking it.
Yes.
Amazing.
Yeah. And yeah, so we had this fantastic voice cast.
Wow.
And yeah, for about 3-4 months, my day-to-day was just get up, decide which track I was gonna work on and work on it.
Right.
And put together a fairly odd mishmash of genres.
Okay.
So the main sort of genres that come up throughout the soundtrack are like grunge rock, like kind of Silent Hill, Death Note kind of, like dark, industrially maybe kind of electronic music,
Okay.
Horror soundscapes, and like epic orchestral music.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah, but that's just what I felt worked for particular scenes. Like the day-to-day wandering around in the game is kind of chill, but it's not happy, right? Like it's not a romance visual novel. It's
Sure.
a dark game. So even when you're just going about your day-to-day, there's got to be kind of a tone or an air of like uncertainty. So that's where a lot of kind of the somewhat ambient kind of grunge rock comes in.
Interesting.
I'm also a big fan of like math rock, and
Tight. I am too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've never heard a math rock soundtrack in a video game before.
Until we do it.
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
Like it would fit so well,
I think it would
especially like
work.
the Japanese style of math rock would work really, really well in a game.
I agree.
So I snuck that in a little bit. There's
Cool.
one track in particular that's got like it's still in 4/4, like it's not crazy, but it's got some very odd snare placements and some weird kind of piano arpeggios.
Cool. Oh, you have to send me that.
Yeah, I will. But yeah, then the big grandiose reveals in the game, like epic orchestral was kind of the only way to go. Like
Sure.
it just it needed this huge kind of wall of music behind it for these moments.
Amazing.
And then obviously, it's a psychological thriller. Like there's times where you just need like horror soundscapes where it's atonal, it's
Sure.
descending into madness.
Sure.
Yeah, and then the dark electronic stuff, because a lot of the areas not really the areas, the certain, what is it? I guess it is kind of the areas in the game, but it's narratively driven, so it kind of depends.
Like chapters more? Or?
Yeah, well, it's like there's 3 versions of some tracks.
Okay.
I think they're titled as like the normal name, and then there's like the fractured version, and what's the other one? There's a third one that's like the most deranged version, basically.
Okay. Interesting.
And they're not direct arrangements of each other. It's more just like, I guess, a musical progression in a way. So usually the first one would be kind of the more grunge rocky, kind of ambient sounding one. And then the middle one will kind of introduce some more kind of electronic elements, synths, sort of be a bit faster paced, a bit more panicked.
Sure. A little more manic.
Yeah, and then the third one would be like properly dark, fast. Like I think the original description before we gave them proper names was basically like a normal version, a panicked version, and it was like an escape version, or like a a killing version or something like that.
Oh wow.
Yeah. And
Interesting.
yeah, I don't think the grunge rock genre would have really fit with the proper dark, like intense manic stuff going on.
Sure.
So
It wasn't evocative enough.
exactly. So that kind of transition from the grunge sound through to the electronic sound as the music speeds up and gets more intense felt natural to me, and so that's kind of what I wrote. And I at least feel like when I go back and listen to those tracks, it's like even the ones that are vastly different genres, they still feel like Corpse Factory tracks.
Right. Which goes back to what you were saying at the beginning.
Exactly.
One of that cohesion.
And then of course there's melodies that come back throughout as well. Like the main character has her own melody that comes back in through certain tracks for certain moments. But yeah, so basically all the music, all the voice stuff was finished. And then someone contacted the developer saying that, they basically represent composers and musicians, and they're like, we know you've got a composer, but we're wondering if you might be interested in collaborating with some of our performers. And Emmy Evans was one of the people on that list.
Amazing.
Who both myself and the developer are very, very big fans of. And so we chatted and we're like, hey, like we don't really have like a main theme, like a like a song,
original song.
An opening theme, right?
Sure.
Because a lot of Japanese games also have an OP the same way that anime do. We could do something, and we sort of back and forth a little bit because it was pretty expensive
for what it was. I think it'll be fine.
Yeah. It was pretty expensive, but ultimately we're like, no, let's do it. Let's do one song where we just go hard. We hire everyone that we need to make it as good as we can.
Nice.
And so all right, next job, write the song, right?
Yeah.
Pressure's on.
Yeah. Right. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And so
you did that before you had written the song?
Yeah, pretty much.
Wow.
Or we at least decided we were going to work with Emmy Evans before I started writing the song.
Wow.
But nothing else had really been planned beyond that.
Okay.
And so I was starting to experiment with some ideas, and started listening to some other kind of anime themes, thinking like what could work. And
Sure.
there was some that had like some really kind of dark electronic stuff that I was like, oh yeah, that kind of fits with the game. But then I think, well, maybe I hadn't quite finished the voice editing, because I came across this passage in the text in the game where I don't know if I should say what happens in the scene, because I think it's a bit of a spoiler.
Small spoiler.
Actually, it's probably okay. I can tell you what happens, but you won't know the context. But if you're worried about any spoilers for Corpse Factory, maybe skip ahead
Beep.
just a little bit.
Sounds good.
But the main character basically walks into this room and sees that someone's hung themselves, and this is hanging from the ceiling. She kind of goes up to this, this corpse, and at first she's like, I think a little bit concerned, but then she kind of becomes interested, and then sort of starts to like almost like fall in love or become like romantically attracted, and starts saying like, oh, you're so pretty, like, I'd like to take you on a date. And it was just so creepy in like a pretty,
Right.
like a romantic amount of just creepiness. And then I was like, scrap all the other ideas. I'm going to write like a death waltz, basically. Just a really creepy, hauntingly beautiful waltz.
Yep.
With a fairly small ensemble. So I think it ended up being piano, guitar, and voice. Piano, cello, and voice.
Right.
And then I think at the end, when it kind of gets big, there's some other things that come in. And yeah, kind of messed around with some chord progressions, came up with this really nice kind of progression with like a chromatic movement in it that just really felt haunting, I guess.
Yeah.
And used a few like chromatic notes in the melody that just, they don't sound like overtly dissonant, they just sound creepy. That's how it felt to me when I was sort of working it out. And basically like the entire song was built from that one kind of chord progression and the melody, and I kind of just build it up over the time. So it starts with just the piano and the voice, and then it comes through again, and the cello comes in, and I think the third section it kind of does like it changes the pattern and becomes more like a fast arpeggioed kind of feel.
I'm going to overlay this song underneath.
Please
this,
do,
right?
yeah. And then finally it gets to the end, and I don't really remember how I came up with the idea, but it's like I wanted it to go bigger, and so I just, instead of ending the melody down onto the tonic, I went up. And I was like, all right, let's just go up one semitone from whatever that note is. That's now our tonic for the modulation, and then we'll do the melody one more time. I think it goes up a -6.
Okay.
I can't remember exactly. It's like not the most common of modulations.
No.
But everything drops out, and it's just the voice hangs on the note and then moves up the semitone, and then like the chorus comes in, the like strings come in, and it's just like a big wall pumping this same dark chord progression at you. Emmy wrote some absolutely beautiful but also kind of creepy lyrics to go with it.
Perfect.
And yeah, it just really captured that that scene that I saw in the game, and I was like, this is the scene in the game that has had the biggest impact on me, so this is what I need to capture in the opening theme. And that's what I went for.
Amazing. Yeah, this is what Eric Whitaker calls like the golden brick.
Yeah.
Like this is the core of the thing that you're trying to make.
Exactly. But yeah, so it's also interesting though, because like it could have been done differently, right? Like we could have started that, and that song could have then fueled the rest of the soundtrack.
Right.
And I'm kind of curious how the soundtrack would have turned out if we'd done it that way.
Right.
But yeah, I think at least for this project, I think doing it this way was a really good choice. Not just, I think it worked musically, but also for the scheduling and organization, it's also just what worked.
Sure.
And obviously that's something you've got to consider as well.
I have to check out this visual novel now.
Oh, please do.
Yeah. I'm a bit of a scaredy cat, so I'll probably skip some stuff.
There's not anything that I think is too like horror in there. It's more like a psych thriller. Yeah, the story itself is quite inspired by Death Note.
Cool. Yeah, for some reason for me the thriller stuff, if it's anime, then it doesn't feel so real, and it can remain theoretical.
Exactly.
And it's all like, oh, this is going to happen to me, kind of thing, because I'm not an anime character.
Yeah.
Sometimes,
if only we were, though.
If only we were, yeah.
Just reincarnated in another world as the greatest video game composer. I mean, one of my actual favorite animes is Blend S.
Blend S?
Yeah, have you seen it?
Mm-mm.
Oh, okay. You'd probably like it, because
that'd be fun.
It's about a con cafe. So like each each waitress that works at the cafe has like a different personality type. So there's like the tsundere and the little sister.
Okay.
All of the one-san.
Okay.
It's like, it sounds super cheesy, and I guess it kind of is, but it's also just really funny. Like way funnier than I was ever expecting it to be. So
well executed kind of.
Yeah. And also, the opening theme has the wildest chords. Like it's like crazy. There's I can't remember his name, but there's a Japanese guy who does like YouTube videos where he kind of breaks down the theory in the chord progressions, and he did one about this game. I remember looking at some of the chords, I'm like, that's way more things that you can add to a chord than I ever thought was possible. Like, yeah, it's pretty wild.
Whoa. Oh, I'm looking forward to it. Is there, you kind of do game jams was one of your items for this.
Yeah.
But is there, and maybe that's the answer to this question, but if there's one piece of advice you would be giving to musicians interested in exploring the space, what would it be?
Definitely do game jams is a good one, because like, not only will you make good connections, you will get like real tangible experience writing music for a game, right? And you do it really quickly, like 48 hours,
Yeah.
And if you don't live in a place that has like game jams that you can do in person, there's so many of them online. They're really easy to find. But aside from that, like cold emails can be a good way to find projects. Be careful with it though. Like if you're, send good ones, do the research. Don't contact projects that already have a composer. Like
just in case.
It just doesn't come across very well.
Sure.
I mean, like, I haven't talked about it too much, and I'll maybe plug it at the end. But like, Toy Box Game Studios making Hollow Hero. So I'm doing all their music, all their audio, everything.
Amazing.
But because, you know, on the Twitter and everything, it's Toybox Game Studios, you know, people will see the stuff that they post. And they've even contacted me before saying like, hey, do you need a composer? Do you need audio? Do you need this? It's like, you know, if you're going to cold contact me, that's fine. I'm happy to chat to people and like give advice.
Sure.
But like, if you're cold contacting me, then you should have at least looked at my profile enough to know that I'm a composer and that I'm doing the music for it, right? Like it's not a good way to open a conversation.
Sure, it doesn't indicate that you've like been thoughtful about.
Exactly. Aside from that, like, just write some music.
Yep.
I've met a few people I think who are keen to kind of get into indie games, but they don't really have that many samples.
Yep.
And also find a good place to display those samples.
Yep.
Whether it's, you know, just a WordPress site. SoundCloud is probably a okay last resort. I don't love the SoundCloud interface, but it works.
Yeah.
Reel Crafter is becoming a big one.
Reel Crafter,
for sending demo reels. It's a really quick and easy way. You can just upload all your music there, and then, you know, basically cut it into a reel, do custom reels.
Oh, wow.
You can see when people open the link, so you know if people have actually looked at it.
Oh, cool.
At least for a lot of companies, it sounds like that's kind of like, you know, that's what they expect now is a Reel Crafter reel if you're looking for a more company style job.
Interesting.
Yeah, I guess
That sounds like plenty.
Those are my bits of information based on my experience.
Makes sense. Yeah, and the common thread I've heard, this is the 4th composer interview I've done, and I did 2 at GDC last year, and then you're my second one of this year.
Cool.
The common thread is usually just like persistence, like it's going to take a while.
Yes, that is definitely also a big thing. Like it's not going to happen overnight. And even if you get like a really big, really awesome project, like when I got Kanji Combat, I thought like, this is it. Like, I'm a video game composer now. And I guess I was, but like, I finished it and it's like, cool. I'm not, aside from like having one addition to my portfolio, it wasn't like work started falling into my lap. I still had to do proper work, finding people, connecting with people, writing more samples, working on other stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, you're still going to game jams now.
Yeah. I mean, you know, I just moved to a new city. Like, what better way to connect with people and like get to know the local industry than just like go and work on some game jam games. It's fun. Like, you know, why do you want to be a video game music composer if you don't think it's fun? So, you know.
Yeah, that's a thing that I feel like in roundtables here and whatnot, it's all about like, okay, like how do I make it happen? How do I like make the money work out? You have to be really strategic, this, that, and the other. And there's very little celebration of like, guys, we're doing the thing that we wanted to do when we were kids.
Yeah.
Like, this is so fun.
It is.
How wonderful that we get to do our dream job, as difficult as it is to do.
Yeah.
Right?
But, you know, that's why we persist with it, right? Yeah, Hollow Hero, we just had a new trailer drop, I think, yesterday.
Amazing.
Yeah, I'll do a quick chat about it, because that's actually a project that the team I met back when I was in university, I think.
Oh, wow.
And we've just been working together since. They still haven't managed to release a project because we just haven't really had the right publishing deal. But they're a really talented team, and so like I'm part of the company, and you know, I have stake in the company. And that's the thing that you can do is like, if you're willing to invest the time, you can take stake in the company as a member of the company and work on the project. And then if it does well, you share in the profits.
Sure.
Right? Like, that's absolutely like a legitimate, you know, anyone who tells you not to do that, it's like, you know, be careful, look out for red flags and stuff, don't go wasting your time, but like,
you advocate
if
for it.
you find good people, like, you know, connect with them, and like, don't pass on something because, you know, like, no, it's not enough money unless you actually like have a reason for, you know, saying no, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Anything else you want to say about Hollow Hero? Just check it out.
Just go watch the new trailer. It's awesome, and it's a musical style that's very not Japanese, I would say.
Cool. Cool. Sounds good. Looking forward to it. I always sign up with じゃあね. Do you want to say it
Yes.
together? Okay. せーの.
じゃあね.
じゃあね.